All right, so I think one of the most interesting, thrilling, adventurous careers that you can choose is archaeology. Because archaeologists are in the business of digging around to find things that have been hidden in the ground, and then to try and figure out what things about history, what interesting facts about what has gone on before can be discerned by understanding what they find in the ground. Archaeologists will go and dig in the ground and find pieces of pottery, or dig in the ground and find especially pieces of bones. And one of the things that they will do is that they will put those bones together and try to assemble those bones in order to see what creature do these bones represent? What animal do these bones represent? And if you've had an opportunity to visit museums where they put bones together, you can be able to tell from the skeletal structure of the bones that, this animal or this creature was an elephant, or this creature was a giraffe because of that long sequence of bones going all the way to heaven. And so when we think about structure as preachers, we are coming to a text like an archaeologist. We are digging in the text like an archaeologist in order to find the bones underneath the text, so that we can learn from the shape of those bones what the emphasis, what this text is about. And so the first thing that you discover when you do the work of an archaeologist is that the bones underneath the ground, and for us as preachers, the bones underneath our text, are not usually arranged in order. So for example, look at that image. If you think of that as a series of bones, is there anything in that image that tells us what creature those bones represent? Right? If I asked all of us, what do you think that is over there? It looks like a bunch of squiggly marks. You don't know what they represent. And so as good archaeologists, one of the things that we have to do is not just identify the different bones. We must then go ahead and put those bones together. So for example, if we were to think of this as bone number 1, and we allocate it there, and then we think of this as bone number 2, and we bring it over here, and then we have this as bone structure number 3, and then we have this 4th group here. What's that? What is that? Does that look like something? That's a human skeleton. Thank you. It is a human skeleton. Now, the artistry behind the human skeleton may not be as solid, as strong, but what we have just done is the work we do as preachers when we are digging about in a text and trying to discern what's going on in this text. So the principle that is going to be guiding our discussion today is as follows: that we must discover the structure of the text to discern its emphasis. Let's write that down. We must discover the structure of the text to discern its emphasis. So, from the illustration that I have given us, we are doing two things in order to be able to make good use of the tool of structure. The first thing is we identify the different bones or the different parts of the text. That's the first thing we do. Identify the different parts of the text. And then two, we identify how those parts of the text fit together. Identify the different parts of the text, the different bones, the pieces of bone. That's what we did with this first section here. Those are the different bones. We are clear that there is 4, 3, 2, 1. 4 different bones in our text. But then we have to do the second thing, where we put those bones together so that we can figure out, discern how they all fit together. Once you are able to do that, then when you discover the structure, how it all fits together, that begins to give you a good idea of what the emphasis of the text is. All right, let me ask a question now. What do you think is the danger for us as preachers? It's Saturday night at 10 p.m. You have to preach tomorrow. You have a text before you. You decide, I just don't have the time to do structure work. So you decide to preach a sermon, to write a sermon, to go preach a sermon before you have discovered what the structure and therefore the emphasis of your text is. What are the dangers of that? What will happen? Let me hear some answers from the floor. Writing a sermon before you have discovered the structure of your text. What are the dangers? Yes, sir, Alan. Please stand and shout your answer for everyone to hear. All right, you might end up with the wrong emphasis. You might end up going above or below the line of scripture. What else? What else could happen if you write a sermon and you don't know what the structure of the text? Yeah, please stand. Yeah, you can preach a good sermon from the wrong text. Why is that? Why is that wrong? Good sermon, you said the right things, but from the wrong text. Why is that a problem? Why would we consider that a danger? Yes, sir.
As good as the sermon is, you've mishandled the text.
Yeah, as good as the sermon is, you've mishandled the text. You've said that God has said this, and he hasn't said that from that text. What else? Raymond? Yeah, you miss what's actually in that text. Anything else? Yes, sir. Yeah, you're not shepherding your congregation to learn to understand the text well. So you're teaching bad Bible study practices to your congregation. All right, let's talk about some of the text types that we find in Scripture, because that will have a bearing on how we think about figuring out the structure of a text. So let's talk about text types. So there are 3 dominant text types in the Bible. What are they? 3 dominant text types. Yes. Poetry. So we have poetry, so you will find that in the Psalms. You find some of that in Ecclesiastes. Yes. Mr. Mithya? Narrative. So narrative would be stories So the Gospels telling us the story of the life of Jesus, or the historical books in the Bible that tell us the story of various kings, or the story of David and Samuel. So those would be narratives. What's the other text type? The final one. Yes, Laban. Discourse. What is discourse, Laban? Argument. Yeah, logical argument. So when you're reading the epistles in the New Testament, or you're reading certain parts of the Old Testament, certain literature in the Old Testament, you will find that you're not dealing with poetry. You're not dealing with a narrative. It's not a story. You're dealing with an argument, a discourse, a speech. So, what text type is the book of Ecclesiastes? You've been working in that book this week. What is the text type or types in Ecclesiastes? Poetry. We have poetry, and what else do we have? Discourse. Poetry and discourse. This would be the two main text types that we find in the book of Ecclesiastes. So, let's ask ourselves a question then. We will limit our thinking now to poetry and discourse because that's what we are working on in this workshop. We are working on Ecclesiastes. That's a text type we find there. So let's ask ourselves, what are some... Yes, sir? Sorry? How is a narrative presented?
Something from the story, it tells the story of a man who, by his wisdom, saved a small city. And it also tells the story of how he tasted himself with pleasure.
So the reason we think of that as discourse is because that story is told in the context of a speech. So the preacher is giving a speech, and inside the speech, he tells that short story, but the broader thing he's doing is discourse. Yeah. Thank you for that. Let's think now together about some strategies for discerning the structure when we are dealing with discourse and when we are dealing with poetry. So let's start with discourse. So you have a speech. What are some of the strategies that you use to discern the structure in a speech? What kinds of things would you note? Yes, Wanjohi.
Repetition.
All right, you would note repetition of words or ideas. What else would you note in discourse? Yes, sir. Contrast, comparison and contrast. Pardon my bad handwriting. I hope you can see what's going on. It's contrasting. Comparison and contrast. What else would you be noting in a discourse? Yes. So keywords, would that be repetition?
No. Things that, like conjunctions.
All right. So connecting words. All right. Connecting words. What are some examples of connecting words? And, because, therefore, etc. So they help you to trace what's going on. One more. What other strategy would you use to discern structure in a discourse? When you're dealing with an argument, yes, sir. Logic. You're looking at the sequence of ideas and how they are flowing. So the logical flow of thought or ideas, the logical flow of thought or idea. So you're noting that. All right, let's Let's think about poetry briefly, because this is also part of what's going on in Ecclesiastes. Poetry. What's important when you're trying to discern structure in poetry? Imagery. So you need to note use of imagery. Use of imagery, shifts in imagery. Psalm 23, you're a shepherd in a field, and then all of a sudden the imagery shifts to a host who's preparing a meal, putting a table before you. Shifted imagery. All right, what else? In, yes, stanza. Stanza is huge in poetry. Figuring out what are your stanzas, what are the key ideas in each stanza, and how do those ideas relate with one another. Anything else in poetry? Yes, sir? Parallelism. That's a hard one. Parallelism. What does that mean? Yes, the relationship between the lines in a stanza. There is relationships where the lines are, one is repeating the same thing as the line before it. So if the first line is not as clear, the second line helps you to understand what the first line is saying. What other relationships exist between lines in poetry? Other than this line is just confirming what the first line said. Yeah. Yeah, it could be further developing the first line. What the first line said is developed more in the second line. It could also be contrasting. All right, but that is parallelism. All right, let's do an example together. Turn to Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1 to verse 11. Please, someone stand up and read it for us loudly. Ecclesiastes chapter 2, verse 1 to verse 11. Philip, thank you.
Ecclesiastes 1:11 and reading from my ESV. I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Enjoy yourself. But behold, this also is vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? I searched with all my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the children of man to do under heaven during the few days of their life. I made great works, I built houses, and planted big vineyards for myself. I made myself gardens and parks, and planted in them all kinds of fruit trees. I made myself pools from which to water the forest and growing trees. I bought male and female slaves, and had slaves who were born in my house. I had also great possessions of herds and flocks, more than any who had been before me in Jerusalem. I also gathered for myself silver and gold and the treasure of kings and provinces. I got singers, both men and women, and many concubines, the delight of the sons of man. So I became great and surpassed all who were before me in Jerusalem. Also my wisdom remained with me, and whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I kept my heart from no pleasure, for my heart found pleasure in all my toil, and this was my reward for all my toil. Then I considered all that my hands had done, and the toil I had expended in doing it, and behold, all was vanity and striving after the wind, and there was nothing to be gained under the sun.
Thank you, brother. All right, what we just read, what text type is that between poetry and discourse? That's discourse. All right, so let's take one of the strategies that we identified, logical flow of thought or ideas, and apply it to this passage. So I'd like you to discuss, have a brief discussion with your partner. You could be twos or threes, and answer this question using the strategy of logical flow of thought. What parts of this passage do you identify? Just different parts of the passage that you would identify. You will identify verse 1 to verse whatever, verse what to verse what. What parts of this passage logically would you identify? Let's have a brief discussion, a minute or so, and then we'll come back and hear what you have. All right, I'm hoping at this point you're wrapping up your discussion. Give you 20 more seconds to identify the parts and write them down. All right, let's come together now and hear what you have. All right. Let me hear how many parts you came up with. So how many bones and what they are.
You have come up with 2 parts.
2 parts, okay.
1 to 8.
1 to 8. What's going on in 1 to 8?
What he did.
What he did, okay. And then?
From 9 to 11.
Okay.
What he became.
So let's say group 1 here, 2 parts. Verse 1 to 8. You call that?
What he did.
What he did. And then verse 9 to 11. What he became. What he became. Who had more than 2 parts? Who came up with more than 2 parts? All right, let's hear the guys at the back.
We had everything they had except that 4 verse 11, the third part for itself.
So 1 to 8.
1 to 8, what he has done. And then verse 9, what the result of that was.
So, and then verse 9 to 10. What? Result.
And then verse 11, what he concluded.
Conclusion. Anyone else? Yeah. Verse 1 to 3, contemplation. 4 to 8, action.
Then 9 to 10, reflection.
Reflection. And 11, conclusion. All right. One more. Yes, Andy. 1 to 3. Summary.
4 to 10 as proving the thesis.
To 10, proving.
Thesis, and then 11. Repeats the same.
11,
11 is a repetition.
summary. Yeah. So one of the things that I think you notice with all of your work is that it approximates roughly the same thing. In other words, there is what he does, and then there is what he concludes from what he does. But there's a question of how do we pass out the passage particularly. So I'd like us to zoom in on what Andy and his crew of guys have done. I think this sort of gets at a really good breakdown of the passage. So let's look at what's going on in verse 1 and verse 2. So verse 1 and verse 2, I said in my heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure, enjoy yourself. But behold, this also was vanity. I said of laughter, it is mad, and of pleasure, what use is it? You added verse 3 in your structure there. I searched with my heart how to cheer my body with wine, my heart still guiding me with wisdom, and how to lay hold on folly. So let's talk about where we see a lot of agreement with you all. 4 to 10 you say proving. This other group here, I called you group 2, but you're not group 2, you should be group 3. The Lemayans at the back, action and reflection. This would be 4 all the way to 10. Let's start with that middle section. Just quickly note what's going on, which you guys included as what he did. So, what kinds of activities under the banner of what he does do we see in this passage? Let's talk about the specific activities we see him doing in the passage. His actions. Let's identify them. And give me the verse. Yes.
Verse 1, say in my heart,
Sorry? Yeah. Oh, verse 1, he said in his heart, come now, I will test you with pleasure. Let's think about what are the ways in which he tested his heart with pleasure in the passage. Yes. All right. So verse 4, built houses. Yeah, to test his heart with pleasure. So he built houses, yeah.
Verse 3, cheered his body with wine.
Verse 3, wine. What else? Sorry? Planting vineyard. What verse? That's still verse 4. Vineyards. What else? Gardens and? So that's verse 4. Planting vineyards, gardens, and parks. So, that's verse 4 and 5. All right. Vineyards, gardens, parks. What else? He did what? He made? What verse is this? Verse 6. He made pools. You guys are sounding very different from here. So pools, he made pools. What else? What verse? 7. What slaves? What else? Animals. So a lot of, which you're calling amassing wealth. So this is, you would call that verse 7 and 8. Amass wealth. So flocks and silver. All right, so verse 9, becoming great on account of all of this. Where is this? Verse 8, yeah, we have concubines and women. All right, and then verse 9, he becomes great on account of all of these things. Verse 10, what's he saying in verse 10? Sorry?
He never denied himself any pleasure.
Yeah, so other pleasures that he saw, he did not deny himself. Did not deny himself pleasure. So, according to, so this is verse 3 to verse 10. He's just listing out a series of experiments, a series of things he did to do what? What is he doing? What does the earlier part of the passage tell us about the nature of the experiment he's doing? Yeah. So, in verse 1, he tells us what he's doing, testing his heart. What does he do in verse 2? Yeah, in verse 2, what does he say? In verse 2, he says, laughter is mad. And he says, what of pleasure? It's what? What use is it? So what is he doing? He's told us, I want to test my heart with pleasure, verse 1. Then verse 2, he tells us of pleasure, what use is it? What has he just done? I want to test my heart with pleasure, what use is it? Before he gets into his experiments, what does he do in verse 1? Yeah.
Yeah, I think in verse 2, he wants to prove the point in verse 2.
Yeah.
Now, what he does.
Yeah. He gives us his conclusion before he tells us what he did. I said, I'll test my heart with pleasure. And then here is where I ended up. I said of pleasure, what use is it? Right? So he gives us a, let's call it a summary or a summary and conclusion. What does he do in verse 11? What's he saying in verse 11? Yes.
Actually repeating the conclusion that he did in his mind.
Yeah.
Confirming what he said at the end of verse 9.
Yeah.
All these things that he was doing, he discovered everything was right. So he's doing that to conclusion.
Yeah, so he sums up all that he had done, all his toil, wine, women, building, all that stuff. Summary and conclusion, which he says is vanity, right? So this looks very disorganized. Let's make that clearer. So we've said verse 1, verse 2, we have a summary and conclusion, which is what? What's his conclusion? Pleasure is vanity. And then verse 3 to 10, if you could summarize what's happening in verse 3 to 10, he's going through the list of things he did. How would you summarize that? Experiments in pleasure.
Worldly pleasure. We qualify that to worldly pleasure. So it's not just pleasure in God, but pleasure
Yeah.
in worldly.
Yeah. What he did to test his heart with pleasure. And then we can say in brackets that those experiments, wine and work and slaves and etc. Riches and women. And then we have verse 11, which we said is also a summary. I sum up everything I've just done and I conclude what? What's his conclusion? Pleasure is vanity. So let's, now you see, this is not an exact science. This doesn't have to be the exact structure that you end up coming up with. We've seen that, you could see verse 9 as a kind of reflection as opposed to yet another addition to the pleasure he did. So there's different things you can pass out differently. But once you identify those parts and then you put them together, you begin to see something coming out. So if you could summarize what this passage is about based on the structure that we have discerned, what would you say this passage is about? Who'd like to give us a sentence about this passage is about X? Based on this structure. Yes, sir. Do not apologize. Go ahead. Pleasure is vanity. Anyone who would like to add to that or subtract to that? This is not, era of staying on the line. Is there anyone who would like to add anything to that? You're like, this passage is about this. Yes, Raymond. Self-sought pleasure is vanity. And the reason you're adding the self-sought is, the verse 3 to verse 10. I did this, 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 I did this. This is my conclusion. Pleasure is vanity. All right. Let's do another example. Let's turn to Proverbs. Chapter 9, verse 1 to 6. This is poetry, so I'd like us to use imagery. Imagery shift to discern structure. So somebody stand up and read for us Proverbs 9, 1 to 6. Read it loudly, brother.
Wisdom has built her house, has hewn her 7 pillars. She has slaughtered her beasts, she has mixed her wine. She has also set her tea. She has sent out her young women to call from the highest places down. Whoever is simple, let him turn in here. To him who lacks sense, he says, come, eat of my bread, and drink of the wine I sip. Give your simple ways, and walk the way of wisdom.
Thank you. All right, so I'd like you to discuss with your teammates, 2 or 3 of you, what are the main images that we see in that passage. All right. Let me hear what you came up with. What are the main images in those 6 verses? Yes, Henry. Sorry? So we have a house. What's going on in this house? A house, we have preparation for a feast. So the house is built, right? And then we have this preparation for a feast. Who's building the house? Who's doing the building and preparing? Wisdom. So we have the image of wisdom as a hostess who's built a house and prepared a feast. So let's call that image 1. What's another image we see in the passage? It's the next main image. Sorry? young woman, where? Which verse? Verse 3. What is the young women doing? So, come again? Yes, the young women are inviting. Where are they? Where are they located? Yeah, so they're not in the house where the feast has been, the house that's been built and the feast has been prepared. They are where? They're outside. They're outside in the highest places in the town. They're in different places out in the town, and they are inviting. So we have young women in town inviting. What are they inviting people to do? Yeah, they're inviting people to come. What verse is that? To come where? Come where they be invited to go? Come feast where? In which house? House of wisdom. Yeah, come feast, inviting. Come feast in wisdom's house. So we can say that that's image 2. So which verses would we localize image 1? Verse 1 to verse? Verse 1 to verse 2. And then where do we localize image 2? Verse 3 all the way to verse 6. All right. So those are our 2 bones. Let's call those our 2 bones. We need to ask ourselves, how do they fit with one another? What is the relationship of image 1 and image 2? Is it a comparison contrast? Is it a supporting argument? Is it an emphasis? What's the relationship between our 2 images? How would you construe how these 2 images are relating? Yes.
I would say there's feast in both of them.
Right, so there's a feast in both of them. How is the first image, which has feasts, and second image, which has an invitation, how are they relating? What's the logical connection between the 2?
One is the preparation,
Uh-huh.
the other is an invitation to what is prepared.
Yes. So preparation and then an invitation to what has been prepared. So the second image is adding to, is not subtracting from, is not contrasting with, it's adding to the first image. A feast has been prepared, and then the logical sequence is that people, the simple, are being invited to come and partake of this feast. So, having seen those 2 images and figured out their relationship to one another, what would you say this passage is about? Because that's our emphasis. When we say emphasis, we are saying this passage is about this. So who would like to take a crack at saying this passage is about this? Yes, Henry. Yes, this passage is about the invitation to feast at the table of wisdom. Would anyone like to add anything to that? Nuance that? I think that's a good way of thinking about it. This passage is about an invitation to come and feast at the table of wisdom. I think as you're preaching and as you're doing more work on the passage, you could go into the details of the kind of labor, the kind of richness, the kind of lavishness that is there in this feast, the kind of openness of this invitation. It's not to specific people, it's to anyone out there in the streets. Those of you who are simple, come and partake of this feast. All right, let's do... Yes, sir.
What if we say that this passage is about the lavish feast that wisdom has to offer?
Yeah. Yeah. Yes, that's fine. Yeah, this passage is about the lavish feast of wisdom that is being offered. That's fine. That's also another way of stating what the emphasis is. Yeah. So your structure, the work of discerning your structure in the passage is to help you discern the emphasis of the passage. So that once you can say, based on this structure, I am now convinced that this passage is about this, then you can move on to using the tools of context to figure out what the author of Proverbs or the author of Ecclesiastes was seeking to argue. If this passage is about this, what was he seeking to argue to his audience? What was he seeking to tell them by showing them this picture of the lavishness of wisdom and the invitation of wisdom to come feast at the table? All right, let's do one last one. We don't have a lot of time. Let's turn back to Ecclesiastes. Go to chapter 11. Verse 1 to verse 6. Let's have someone stand up and read that for us. Ecclesiastes 11, 1 to 6. Read it loudly, brother. All right, thank you, brother. Let's begin by noting repeated phrases or ideas that you see in the passage. So have a discussion with your group mates, and then let's identify repeated phrases or ideas. What do you see coming up as a repeated phrase or idea? All right. What did you find? What's a repeated phrase or repeated idea? What? You do not know. Where do we see that? Alright, so we have verse 2, and then we have verse 5 twice, and then we have verse 6. Alright, I'd like you to notice, maybe we can do this one quickly for the sake of time. What is the main command or commands and calls to action in this passage? What are you being told to do in the passage? Give me specific words in the passage. Words in the passage. Cast. What else? Give. What else? Sow. Verse 6. What's a command in verse 6? Sow your seed. At evening, what are you supposed to? Do not withhold. Cast. Where do we see cast? Verse. We have cast in verse 1. Where do we see give? Verse 2. Where do we see sow, do not withhold? Verse 6. All right, so it seems like so far our repeated phrases and the commands and calls to actions are showing up between verse 1 and 2. So let's begin to visualize what might be a emerging structure. So verse 1 and 2, we have this cast, give, for you do not know. And then verse 5, 6, we have you do not know. So do not withhold your hand. So what's missing in our identifying the parts of what's going on in our passage? Verse what? Verse 3 and 4. So we have a piece of bone here. We have another piece of bone here. But with just those two, have we found out what our passage is all about yet? Maybe, maybe not. So we need to figure out what's going on with verse 3 to 4. So what's going on in verse 3? What kind of imagery do we notice in verse 3? Verse 3. What's the imagery in verse 3? Yes, sir. Yeah. Yeah. Okay. So cloud is full. What happens? It falls. What is the nature of the relationship between full cloud and rain? What do we call that? Cloud is full, therefore it rains. Is that comparison contrast? Is that cause effect? Is that supporting? What's that? Cause effect. Cloud becomes full. So we have a cause effect relationship pointed out, clouds and rain. What about the next image? What's the next image in verse 3? Next image? Somebody tell me. So we have a cloud and the next one is? Alright, so we have clouds full, which leads to rain. And then tree falls. And then what? Stays where it fell. Which is yet another cause effect, right? If a tree falls here and you come back next week, it will be where it fell. Alright, so we have this, we don't yet know what role this cause effect imagery is playing. We just know he's giving us these two images of clouds and of a tree. Then we go to verse 4. So we have a cloud, one, we have a tree. What do we expect to find in the next one? Cause effect, right? Cloud is full, it rains. Tree falls, it stays where it is. Alright, so with that, he's already teed us up in our minds to expect cause effect. So, what do we find in verse 4? So, instead of a cloud and a tree, we have a what? We have a person. Right? We have a person. What is this person doing in verse 4? He's observing the wind. He's looking at conditions. All right? What is the effect of his looking at the conditions? What? So let's say a person observing conditions. What is the effect of his observing the wind, observing conditions? What happens? Yes, Henry. He'll make his decisions based on that. What does the passage tell us? He will not sow, right? He will not sow, and then therefore he will also not reap. If he's regarding the clouds, that's another form of parallelism. It's just saying the same thing. He's looking at the wind, the conditions, looking at the clouds, and the effect is that the same way when clouds are full, they rain, and when a tree falls, it stays there. The person who regards conditions, the effect is that they will not sow. All right. So, that's what's going on in verse 3 to verse 4. This cause-effect, which is saying, the cause-effect is making this one point, that the person who waits for perfect conditions will not. So that's the point that cause-effect is making. So let's say, don't wait for perfect conditions. All right. So now we have all the pieces of our bones in the passage. Sorry? Yeah, go ahead. Yeah.
In that question about observation, it almost feels like whatever is happening in verse 3 is not happening in verse 4.
Yeah.
So there's a cause and effect in verse 3, and then verse 4 seems to hold on, contrast everything that is happening. So if it rains, there's a cloud, there's cloud, it rains. Then verse 4 says, if you observe the clouds, not so, then you probably, because you might see the clouds sun, so you might not work to do so. He's probably saying that it seems like he's basically also contrasting.
So he's saying, is there a contrast? Does it change your observation of that? Does it change the conclusion that what he's saying in verse 3 and 4, in the end, is don't wait for perfect conditions. If you wait for perfect conditions, you won't sow. In the same way, when a cloud is full, it rains. And in the same way, when a tree falls, it stays where it is. Let's have this discussion offline, just for the sake of time. Yeah. All right, so assuming that that's the point he's making, cause effect. Rain, clouds full, it rains. Tree falls, it stays where it is. He who observes conditions doesn't sow. That's just a cause and effect. If we have those three bones in our passage, what would you say then that this passage is about? What do you think this passage is emphasizing? Based on those three bones. Verse 1 and 2, cast, give, you do not know. You do not know what will happen. You do not know what the future holds. Verse 5, 6, you do not know. Therefore, so, don't withhold your hand. Verse 3, 4, don't allow yourself to be the person who waits for perfect conditions to act. So, with that, what would you say this passage is about? Yes? Take action. Take action. Would you like to add anything to that? Yes? Yeah. Get out there. Do something. For you don't know what will happen. Right? Take action. Take risks. You don't know what will happen. Yes, Chris.
Don't let your not knowing.
Yeah. Don't let your not knowing cause you not to act. Excellent. Any questions? Yeah, Raymond, you have to add emphasis? Go ahead. Yeah. Because you do not know, take action variously. Yeah. Somebody said diversify your portfolio. You do not know. Right? And the thing that you're being discouraged from doing is waiting for perfect conditions before you act. All right, our time is